Good morning, sir.
Good morning. कैसे हैं डॉक्टर खुर्शीद?
I'm fine, sir.
Good evening.
Okay,
Good evening, Arzati.
so good evening, sir. We're just going to go live now. So, namaskar and a very warm welcome to everyone joined in today on our 63rd Know Your Species, Know Your Zoo talk. This talk is being organized by the Central Zoo Authority in New Delhi as part of the ongoing Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. The Mahotsav is a 75-week-long celebration to commemorate 75 years of India's independence, which falls on the 15th of August 2022. The Central Zoo Authority is taking this celebration forward through a massive outreach campaign entitled Conservation to Coexistence, the People Connect. Under the helm of this campaign, we will be showcasing 75 conservation priority species and 75 zoos, highlighting one species and one zoo each week. We are currently in week 63 of this celebration with the Hangul as a species in focus. And since we do not have a zoo established in the Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir yet, so we have with us representatives from the Department of Wildlife Protection, Jammu and Kashmir. So before we move on to the talk that we have today, I would like to invite Mr. Gupta, who is the Chief Wildlife Warden of the Department of Wildlife Protection, J&K, to please, give an overview of the functions and, whatever you'd like to stay with for starting the session. So over to you, sir.
Good evening. I'm Suresh Kumar Gupta, PCCF and Chief Wildlife Warden J&K. As Dr. Arundhati has told that we don't have presently any Hangul in any captive facility. So all our efforts are mostly aimed at in situ conservation, although we are also working on ex situ conservation facility. And Mr. Suhail, Wildlife Warden JNK, is looking after that. I have with me Mr. Suhail, Wildlife Warden, and Dr. Samina Charu. She is a research officer and alumnus of WII. We have also with us Mr. Sohail Wage, Wildlife Warden Technical. He is alumnus of AMU. I just want to tell that for this week, J&K has made a schedule of a number of programs starting from the 23rd to 29th with regard to conservation of Hangul awareness. We are having at least one program every day at different parts of the UT, and we'll be at the end of the presentation by Mr. Sohail. He will be giving the detail of the schedules. I am sure that after the this week celebration is over, I'll be sending a report to CZA also with regard to the programs that we held to commemorate this week with regard to the Azadi Ka Amrit also. And now I'll just say that Dr. Khurshid and Mr. Sohail, who are working on this aspect, they will be presenting their talks. So over to you, Pat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gupta, for opening the remarks and explaining on what the activities are that you're conducting in the state. So we will now move on to the species talk for today. So joined in today to speak to us on the species in focus is Dr. Khurshid Ahmed, who's the senior scientist and head of the Division of Wildlife Sciences in the Sher-e-Kashmir University of Agricultural Science and Technology, Kashmir. So Dr. Khurshid has done his doctorate in the field of wildlife sciences on the species in focus today, which is the Hangul, and he has extensive experience in the field of wildlife management and conservation, especially on Himalayan ungulates and avifauna. He has been instrumental in resolving the phylogenetic status of the Hangul and has been the first person to successfully collar the species for his study in the wild, and which has also led to the classification of the species as a separate species altogether from the red deer. Through his career, Dr. Khurshid has supervised numerous research projects and has provided his inputs at various national and state level committees. So today he will speak to us more on the species, the issues, the gaps, and the way forward for its conservation. So over to you, sir. I will share the presentation on your behalf. Is it visible, sir?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is visible.
Okay.
Evening, Dr. Suresh Gupta ji, the Chief Wildlife Warden Jammu and Kashmir. Mr. Sohail Intisar Sohail, Wildlife Warden, uh, Kishtwar National, this Shopian Wildlife Division, Jammu and Kashmir. To begin with, the species as such, before going into the species in detail, I have my talk uh, on the issues, gaps, and way forward for the species conservation. So before going into the species, I would just want the next slide, please. Just want to give a brief of how the species conservation is very important. As we already know that there have been a lot of human-driven impacts on the biodiversity all over the globe, and the India and Jammu and Kashmir is also facing all those human-driven negative impacts on the biodiversity, and which has resulted in loss of number of species globally, and we have been seeing the species extinction uh, being these the increase in the listing of species under threat categories. So in India also, we have a lot of species in the Himalayan region. That includes the species that we are talking about, the Kashmir red deer or Hangul. They are at the brink of getting more and more uh, challenges, and being threatened under various categories. So, next, please. So, when we talk about Hangul, it was earlier considered as subspecies of European red deer, but with lot of genetic research that we have and others have conducted on this species, the species, this Hangul, has now been classified as a separate species under Terim red deer, the Central Asian clade of red deer, and it has got recognized by IUCN as a separate species under Terim red deer, with Bukhara or Yarkand red deer as another two subspecies with it. It is of the three subspecies in the Pterim red deer clade. Now, the Hangul is the only subspecies which is listed by IUCN as critically endangered, based on the population, this population, low population of this subspecies, and the limited uh, range in confined to Kashmir Himalayas only. So it is also Schedule 1 species. It is endemic to Kashmir Himalayas, and it is listed as the Appendix 1 species in the CITES. Uh, we have around less than 200 individuals are surviving in the wild at present, and there's none in the captivity. And this is a heritage and state animal of Jammu and Kashmir. This is the species which is also listed as among top 15 species of high conservation priority in the National Wildlife Action Plan. And this Hangul population was widely distributed in the mountains of Kashmir in the earlier periods. Now we have a viable population of Hangul presently restricted to Dachigam National Park, with few isolated population in the adjoining areas. Next, please. So if we go about the morphology of the Hangul, it is completely different. Now, based on the genetics also, we have been able to recognize that it is different from the red deer, European red deer, and the other red deer species. And it stands about one 12 meters 4 feet at the shoulder and measuring up to uh, 210 centimeters from nose to tail. So these are different kinds of, you can see shape and size variations in the species in different age levels and at different sex variations are there. Next, please. So, as I already said, that this species it has a limited distribution range globally. We This is endemic to Kashmir Himalayas, and in Kashmir also it had a limited distribution range, ranging from the south in the Kishtwar National Park up to the north in the Gurez National Park. Now, if you can see that we had this kind of distribution range all across the Zanskar mountain range and Greater Himalayas, and the but most of the places the Hangul has wiped out almost, and we have the restricted distribution now of this species in Dachigam National Park and the areas adjoining Dachigam National Park. Next, please. So the population figures, if we go about the population figures we have of the different studies that have been conducted on the species and the annual population census that the Department of Wildlife Protection carries out annually. So we see huge variations in the population trends over the years, and we can see also the declining trend of population during the recent years. Next, please. Now, these declines in the population have been earlier thought of because of the excess to livestock grazing, which has led to the habitat loss and degradation of the habitats of the species. We have a huge excessive livestock grazing in the upper pastures of the Chigam National Park, and we had a government sheep breeding farm in Dachigam National Park established earlier, and the Department of Wildlife Protection has done a commendable job by shifting of the government-owned sheep breeding farm from Dachigam National Park, which has provided a lot of additional habitat for the species to grow in Dachigam National Park. And these livestock grazing, the pressures, some of the pressures are still there in the population in the upper elevations. They have actually compelled the Hangul to remain restricted to the lower Dachigam National Park areas, and some of the animals are moving between Dachigam National Park and the other landscapes earlier range areas. Next, please. So forest fire and poaching had also been a huge concern for the species. We have been witnessing this is a latest kind of developments that had taken place, that we witnessed a lot of forest fires in the area, in the habitat, which has also been one of the causes of concern for the species. And apart from that, poaching is also the limiting factor for the growth of the species in the area. A lot of strategies, management strategies have been undertaken by the Department of Wildlife Protection, which included the mapping of forest prone areas, marking of fire lines, controlling burning, and capacity building programs that to train staff. And there have been enhanced surveillance in the area now, and patrolling camps and patrolling has been increased for the last many years, and they are the control measures that Department of Wildlife Protection is taking as of now. Next, please. So, apart from the basic kind of causes that were thought of for the declining population of Hangul, cause of concern for declining of population of Hangul, we try to understand some ecological aspects of the cause of decline of the Hangul, and for that we undertook a study long back in 2001. From there onwards, we have been trying to understand various aspects of ecology and biology of the species which were not known earlier, which are prerequisite for effective conservation and management of these species. So I'm just trying to highlight some of the major research findings that we had uh, come up with during the last 2 decades of our research on the species. Next, please.
I think we've lost connection with Mr. Khurshid. We'll just wait a minute to see if we can just rejoin back. Dr. Khurshid, can you hear me? Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so I think you'll have to start again with the slide. We kind of lost you in between the
Okay.
net connection. Okay,
Okay.
thanks.
So I was talking about the research findings that I'm going to highlight of the research that we have undertaken on the species to understand the ecology and biology of the species. So we try to uh, monitor the species on a long-term basis, and we have been able to come up with the figures of the encounter rates of the species in the Dachigam landscape, and the encounter rates are very low. We have less than one deer per uh, kilometer walk, and the sex ratio is again varying between 15 to 19 males per 100 female, and with a fawn to female ratio of only 9 to 10 individual fawns per 100 female. So these are the these population parameters that we have been able to come up with during the last more than 20 years of our research. Next, please. So we also try to understand the habitat use pattern of the Hangul, and uh, based on the data that we have been able to uh, collect, uh, it has been observed that Hangul is uses the broadleaf forests and conifers in the summers, and the riverine it is restricted to the riverine valleys and grasslands in the winters. Next, please. We have also been able to get the data about the food and feeding habits of the Hangul, and we are now sure about that the Hangul is a mixed feeder. It grazes as well as browses, and the feeding habits vary across the seasons, and uh, uh, it it has more of the browse in its diet during autumn, and but during summer and spring it has more of grasses and herbs in the diet, and it feeds on forbs, ferns, and grasses during spring, summer, and on the browse during autumn and winter seasons. Next, please. So we have also done a lot of basic research on the uh, Hangul genomics and genetics, and we have come about this figure of this simulation of uh, loss of heterozygosity in the population. So there's relatively low genetic variability in the population, and the population has gone into, or it has driven the population into the inbreeding depression, which is a cause of concern for the species again. Next, please. So, based on all these research findings for the last 20 years, we have come up with some of the major ecological issues that are threatening the survival, long-term survival of the species. Those are low breeding, female biased sex ratio, the problem of survival of young, and the inadequate recruitment of fawns to adulthood because of so many other factors, like predation is one of the major limiting factors for the fawn mortality uh, and the fawn survival in the population. And we have seen also the movement of Hangul outside Dashigam National Park, and the corridor connectivity issues are the major limiting factors for the movement and growth and development of the animal. And there, as I already said, there's a relatively low genetic diversity in the population as compared to the other species of the red deer and the other species of the Indian deer, and which has led to the inbreeding depression in the population, which is going to be a major cause of concern for the growth and development of the species. Next, please. So, in order to address some of these issues, we undertook the uh, Hangul movement pattern studies using satellite telemetry, and we have been able to capture and collar five individuals of Hangul, two male, three female, which has provided lot of information which was not known about the species. Next, please. So the earlier initial Hangul conservation, this Hangul collaring program we undertook in 2012, and uh, we have been able to, for the first time, successfully uh, capture and collar the first Hangul in 2013. Next, please. There have been a lot of challenges in capturing and collaring of this sangul, and we have been able to overcome all those these challenges. And in 2013, we, this is the first capture collaring was successfully done, and we have been able to, for the first time, monitor the animal movement or track its movement patterns through satellite collaring. Next, please. And this we have been able to showcase that or validate our observations that the movement of Hangul towards Upper Dachigam National Park is being restricted because of the excessive livestock grazing in the Upper Dachigam National Park, and that observation of ours has got validated through the data we got from the first male collared in 2013, which showed upward movement to Dagwan alpine meadows of Upper Dachigam National Park, but the movement was restricted possibly further to the upper elevations or the upper meadows of Dachigam National Park, possibly because of the heavy disturbance of excessive livestock grazing in that area. Next, please. And we have been able to come up with the home range, the information on the home range size of the collared male. It varies between the seasons from around 5 square kilometers to 8 square kilometers, 5 square kilometers in spring to 8 square kilometers in summer. Next, please. We have also been able to uh, get some information about the behavior of the species and the activity peaks that are again varying between the uh, seasons. We have the high peaks of activity during the mornings and the evening hours of the day. Next, please. So these the first capture collaring has provided lot of information on the uh, ecological aspects. However, we required lot of uh, more individuals to be collared and captured to have the holistic view of the movement and behavior of movement and behavior ecology of the animal. So for that, we try to capture more and more individuals in the of the Hangul to understand the ecology and movement pattern of the species better. Next, please. And it's in 2018 we have been able to successfully capture and collar two more females uh, in Dachigam National Park with a lot of improvisation on the habituation that we had done earlier. We tried to have the effective habituation done in 2018, and we also improvised the dosage of the animal in order to overcome the uh, other problems that that we came across in the previous capture of locating the animal after dotting. So we tried to improvise upon the drug dosage, and it worked very well. We have been able to capture and tranquilize the animal and uh, retain it in after capture this after this dotting into a small area, and we have been able to overcome the uh, tracking of the animals after dotting uh, with the improvisation in the dosage. Next, please. So in 2020, again, we have been able to successfully capture and collar one male and one female Hangul, and this has given us ample data to understand the ranging and movement pattern of the species in Dachigam and the adjoining landscapes. And we have been able to uh, track the Hangul movement to one of the areas in north, the Wangat Conservation Reserve. So this is for the first time that we have been able to validate the observation of the, and we have been able to identify the corridor movement, the corridor area of the movement of the Hangul from Dachigam to Wangat Conservation Reserve towards Gurez Conservation Reserve. And next, please. This has been possible with this coloring that we have been able to validate our earlier observations of its long range movement the movement between these landscapes. And uh, uh, this one of the two females that we captured in 2018 moved between these landscapes and established its summer home range in Wangat National Park, Wangat Conservation Reserve. And uh, it was monitored over the period of 3 months in Wangat Conservation Reserve, and the before it returned back to the Chigam National Park during the autumn. Next, please. We have also been able to, with the help of the Department of Wildlife Protection, we have also been able to uh, uh, install camera traps in the Shikarka Conservation Reserve to monitor the population, the isolated population of Hangul in that area, and we have been successfully able to capture a camera trap picture of Hangul herd of around 12 individuals for the first time, and this has given us a hope that the Hangul in the Shikarka Conservation Reserve are doing well, and we hope that with the augmentation of this population, we will be able to successfully see the growth and conservation, long-term conservation of the uh, population in the Shikarka Conservation Reserve and the landscapes adjoining. Next, please. So the way forward that with the we have so many suggestions for the department and for the Ministry of Environment to uh, take it away for the long term conservation of the species. Next, please. Given the small population size and the restricted range distribution of this species, we has a lot of based on our the research, long to 20 more than 20 years of research. The major uh, these management and conservation needs for the Hangul are being recommended, that include the regular monitoring of the Hangul population on a long-term basis is very much required, with the with the strengthening of the satellite collaring, camera trapping, and population genomics. And uh, we need to also undertake the breeding biology of Hangul, particularly during fawning at the time of rut, to understand the low fawn to female ratio and the low reproduction in the population. We also need to expand the range of the Hangul to the upper alpine meadows of Upper Dachigam National Park and potential corridors outside Dachigam National Park, so that these ideal summer habitats are used by Hangul uh, as it used to use them in the past. Hangul conservation breeding program is very imperative, and we need to initiate it at the earliest before the population is declining further. We need to repopulate most of the erstwhile range areas of Hangul with the help of this Hangul conservation breeding and reintroduction program. And to start with, we have already uh, suggested to start with the repopulation of the augment the population of Hangul of conservation Shikarka Conservation Reserve and Overa Wildlife Sanctuary. And we also need to do strengthen the genomics of Hangul to understand the gene flow pattern in the populations, the isolated populations, the large populations that we have, and to see to understand the inbreeding depression in the population, which is very much imperative for long-term conservation of the Hangul. Next, please. So to start with the conservation breeding program and introduction of the populations, uh, uh, we have done some simulations, and the simulations with those simulations we came to the conclusion that we need to restock at least 10 Hangul individuals. We need to breed them in conservation breeding center in Shikarga Conservation Reserve to augment the population in the conservation breeding, this Shikarga Conservation Reserve to start with, and Overa in the adjoining Overa Wildlife Sanctuary, which have low pressures, human, these biotic pressures in those areas. So if we start with the repopulation of these species, we have come up with the simulations that we will be in the times to come, we will be able to see a significant population, second population of Hangul in Shikarga and Overa Wildlife Sanctuary. Next, please. So, next, please. Next, please. Sorry, it is the overlap of this already done. So, to augment this conservation breeding program and introduction program, we have got some collaborations with the one of the premier institutes in the world, the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, USA, and we have as part of that program, we are at present in the Smithsonian Institution trying to learn the various practicing and procedures that they are following for the conservation breeding of many species, particularly the elk species, elk deer, the Bukhara deer, and other species that are there. So we want to learn the expertise and try to use those expertise for the conservation breeding, successful conservation breeding and introduction program of Hangul in Jammu and Kashmir. Next, please. So people's participation is also very important, and for that we need to have number of awareness programs that Chief Wildlife Warden has already talked about, that the Department of Wildlife Protection is already carrying out, and we need to reach out to the population, these local communities, and try to gain support of the local communities for the Hangul conservation in the region. Next, please. So one of the areas that we also need to look into is the enhanced livelihood options for the local communities to gain their support towards conservation, and for that, Hangul tourism on the pattern of tiger tourism would be uh, one of the options that the department need to think about to gain the local support for Hangul, long-term Hangul conservation. Next, please. Next, please. So capacity building, as I already said, of the staff is very important. When we are in the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute, we have learned a lot that the staff training is very important to for the effective this conservation breeding program, and for that we need to try to build the capacities of the local staff and the staff that would be involved in conservation breeding in order to see the successful mission in the for the long term conservation of the species. Next, please. Next, please. So these are the efforts that we have already undertaken, and with this, I think we have tried to cover some of the major areas that we need to address on. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so much, sir, for sharing such an giving such an insightful talk on the species in focus today. So now we move on to the next part of today's talk, which will be on the in situ and ex situ conservation initiatives that for Hangul, which has been planned by the Department of Wildlife Protection in Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. So we have with us Mr. Intisar Suhail, who is the Wildlife Warden with the State Wildlife Protection Department. And he has done his post-graduation in wildlife science from the Aligarh Muslim University and has been working for over 2 decades with the Wildlife Division. He has worked on the management and conservation of various protected areas in the region, along with community mobilization and awareness. So, Mr. Suhail is also an avid ornithologist and has co-authored 2 books on the important bird areas and threatened birds of Jammu and Kashmir, besides authoring 20 scientific publications. So, he will speak to us today more on the department's initiatives for the conservation of fungus. So, over to you, sir. I will share the presentation here.
Thank you, Arundhati. Dr. Khurshid has mostly talked about the scientific aspect of the Hangul conservation, and I would like to talk about the managerial aspects, the management interventions we put in, and what actually we do in the ground.
So, is it visible to you?
Next. Yeah. Can you put it on the PPT more? Yes. Thank you. As Dr. Khurshid has already mentioned, the Hangul or the Kashmir red deer is the only representative of the red deer group in the whole subcontinent. It was designated as a separate species in 2017. Earlier, it used to be clubbed with the European red deer, Cervus elephas. Now it is Cervus hangulu. So it is a critically endangered species as per IUCN categorization and is listed in Appendix 1 of the CITES. It is also included in the Schedule 1 of the Wildlife Protection Act 1972. Next. As far the past distribution is concerned, historically there was an arc of 65 miles extending throughout the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir and right up to the Chamba district of Himachal Pradesh. In fact, in the Siya sanctuary of Himachal Pradesh, there was a presence of Hangul in earlier eras. Next. The present distribution is limited to Dachigam National Park and some adjacent areas, which include protected areas like Wangat Conservation Reserve or Crew Konmo Conservation Reserve, Tral Wildlife Sanctuary, which has been notified recently. It used to be a conservation reserve earlier. Then Overaru Wildlife Sanctuary, Gurez Valley, and Kishtwar High Altitude National Park also. Next. And the biology of the deer is that it prefers a mixed broad-leaved or coniferous forest and alpine meadows in summer, while as in winters it likes to be at home in the grasslands in the lower areas of Dachiga. The breeding season commences with the rut, which starts in September and peaks in mid-October. So that's the time when the mating occurs, and the gestation period is around 8 months. And we are unfortunately, in case of the Hangul, only one fawn is born to a female, and that too on alternate years. So females conceive in alternate years. Next. And the population trends, as already discussed by Dr. Khurshid, earlier there were around the independence period, 1945, we had some 3,000 recorded individuals of Hangul in Kashmir Valley and around. And then it drastically declined in 1945 and remained around 200 till 2009. Next. The recent trends, population trends have shown a stable population with a steady increase in the population, with the latest census done in 2021, which shows 261 individuals. And there is a problem with the female fawn ratio and the sex ratio, which is being studied. And next, recently, very recently, it was for the first time that we did a genetic study to determine the trends in population, and this was done in collaboration with CCMB, Hyderabad, Lacons, and the Department of Wildlife Protection. And the preliminary findings have been very encouraging, and we have been told that the minimum number, as per the genetic study, is 294 right now, which is very encouraging. And the department has now decided that this genetic methodology will be included in our census operations now on. Next. Is the efforts we put in for the maintenance and recovery of Hangul populations in its natural habitat. And that is spread over the length and breadth of J&K, with main focus on Dachigam National Park and surrounding areas, which include the conservation reserves and protected areas, which I have already mentioned. Next. In talking more about Dachigam, it used to be a hunting reserve or a game reserve of the erstwhile Maharaja of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir till 1945. And Dachigam has the privilege of being one of the oldest notified wildlife sanctuaries, wildlife areas of the country. It was notified way back in 1945 and used to be governed with the game laws of the erstwhile Maharaja, which were very strict, and the entry was even restricted to the national park. Next. It is said that the Maharaja relocated around 10 villages from the area. That's why it's called Dachigam. Dah means 10 in Kashmiri. Maharaja had also an oversight to conserve the area and the landscape for providing safe drinking water to the Serinagasti, which it still does. The catchment still provides safe drinking water to most parts of Srinagar. And in 1982, it was upgraded into a national park from sanctuary. And presently, it's a grade 2, category 2 national park under IUCN grading. Next. The geology and land use of the Dachigam National Park is highly mountainous, forming part of the Greater Himalayan mountain range. It is traversed with rocky cliffs and crystalline rock formations. Altitude range from 1,660 meters above sea level, which is the Dachigam Gate, right up to 4,300 meters in the upper areas. Next. The land cover is mostly evergreen, semi-evergreen forest, which comprises around 60% of the habitat, followed by grasslands and meadows, which are very important habitat for Hangul, which amount around 20% of the total land cover, and then the snow-covered glacier areas, which are permanently snowbound, which is around 15%, and rocky cliffs around 5%. Next. The vegetation can be is typically moist temperate type, as categorized by Champion and Sate in 1968. The riverine forms mainly the Aesculus indica and the blue pine, Parascia, and the wild walnut, which is interspersed with Indigofera viburnum and other species. The coniferous range from 2,200 to 3,300 meters, which is again blue pine and fir, Abies pindro, and also with some strands of PCS mithiana. Then we have 3,000 at 3,400 meters and above, we have the alpine scrub and pastures, which is dominated by Betula utilis, the birch, with the undergrowth of juniper and rhododendron, followed by viburnum and other species. Next. The management interventions in Dachigam we put in are mainly habitat oriented. The habitat management includes various afforestation and aided regeneration programs, which also include the pasture development, particularly which is Hangul oriented to provide grassland habitat for the Hangul. And some soil conservation measures are also taken up, particularly at the soil erosion prone areas, which include doing some check dam measures and create wire bunding also across the along the nalas, the fast flowing streams, which are prone to soil erosion. Next. The main objective of the protection and surveillance includes anti-poaching activities, which is in fact the major activity done by our frontline staff throughout the year. We have regular patrolling of vulnerable areas. We have patrolling paths where the staffs regularly go 24/7 to monitor the movement of Hangul as well as to keep the poachers at bay. And this is done particularly in the vulnerable seasons, which is winter. And special anti-poaching squads are formulated every winter, and they, even in deep snow, they traverse through the vulnerable areas and try to protect this threatened species. And we have created a network of informers in the adjacent villages, which provide information about the erstwhile hunters, which sometimes are trigger happy and try to venture into the forests. Next. And we also provide in harsh winters, we provide supplementary feed to the Hangul in their habitat in the form of salt and melon licks, and also some dry willow fodder stacks, which are kept there and are seen being used by the Hangul in winter regularly. Next. Forest fire is another problem behaved within this in the national park, particularly the grasslands, which are prone to forest fires, particularly in autumn season and peak summer season. Mostly man-made fires are there due to anthropogenic activities around, and the grasslands are affected, which happen to be the prime habitat of Hangul. And so, next, there's a comprehensive fire management strategy. Next, comprehensive fire management strategy is there in place, and we have mapped all the fire-prone areas. And particularly, we go for making of fire lines in the grasslands, which help in controlling the fires. Controlled burning is also done, and use of firefighting equipment is regularly being done. And the basic aim of the capacity building and training programs of the staff is to skill them with various fire preventive measures. And awareness in the fringe communities is also conducted to make them aware about the do's and don'ts to be employed while they are in the forest, particularly to protect the forests from fires. Next. The grazing is also an issue. As you all know, the nomadic grazers, they come to the high alpine pastures of the Kashmir Valley in summers along with their livestock, and some degree of pressure is also observed in upper Dachigam areas, and and this is also a very important management intervention to control grazing in the upper areas. And because the grazing puts in a direct competition for food with of the livestock with the wild ungulates, particularly Hangul. Next. In every grazing season, as it commences in late April and May, we formulate seasonal anti-grazing camps and station them at the key points. Checkposts are there in place where staff is stationed to control and monitor the movement of the graziers so that they don't venture into the protected areas. And department has recently accomplished the task of shifting of the government-owned sheep breeding farm, which was right there inside the national parks since 30, 40 years. And it was recommended scientifically to remove this from the national park, and this has been successfully accomplished. And the area is now available for use by Hangul. Next. The ex-situ conservation is necessary because only surviving representative as Hangul is in the Indian subcontinent. and it's endemic to our state or union territory. The wild population at a point had gone below 200. So there is a degree of inbreeding depression, which Dr. Khurshid also talked about. And it is the only viable population which is restricted to a area, a limited area. That's why it is vulnerable to getting extinct. And not a single individual of this species is right now in captivity anywhere. Next. As far as the conservation breeding center is concerned, the program was approved by Central Zoo Authority in 2008, and they released a grant of 42.50 lakhs. And the very next year, the construction work on the paddock commenced, and the site was selected at Shikarga, which lies 50 kilometers south to Dachigam, and is part of Tral Wildlife Sanctuary, recently declared Tral Wildlife Sanctuary, which earlier used to be a conservation reserve. And this Tral area already supports a relict population of Hangul. So this is why it is best suited for the conservation breeding activity, and it has got a close ecological affinity with Dachigam National Park. Next. As of now, 5.5 hectare area has been enclosed as a paddock to house the founder stock. The height of the paddock is 10 feet. It is fully power fenced, and as an additional protection, we have put in concertina wires, and CCTV cameras also are in place. So this facility is ready to be operationalized. And next, hopefully the founder animals which are to be obtained from wild will be obtained by the end of this year, and this facility will be made operational. And the attempts are being made at procuring the animals from wild through SQUAST and WII. And at present, we are also doing habituation of the wild population in Tral itself, in Shikarga itself, which is being lured to the facility itself. And we have achieved some degree of success when the animals came close to the gate. And since in this year March, there was early warm weather, the animals moved up, and we are hopeful that by the autumn this year we'll be able to bring in the animals and start the conservation breeding facility. Next. The satellite calling project already talked about by Dr. Khurshid. It was a collaborative work of SCOST and the Department of Wildlife Protection. And the main objective was to determine the home range and habitat use movement patterns of Hangul in and around Dachigam, which has been established to a large extent. And we also it has also thrown light on some breeding, conservation breeding of the Hangul. Next. 5 Hangul have been collared, which includes 2 males and 3 females, and it has brought some insight into the summer range and behavior of the animal also. Next. This is, as my chief wildlife warden talked about, the various events which we are organizing in connection with the Hangul Week, which commenced from 23rd May. This is a list of programs we are conducting and have been already conducted. We have had an inaugural event in the Dachigam National Park, followed by today's this online talk, and it will be followed by a walk for Hangul in the Tral Wildlife Sanctuary tomorrow, followed by a symposium in Overaro Wildlife Sanctuary the day after, and then stakeholders meet in Tral Wildlife Sanctuary again on 27th, and a trek for Hangul in Dachigam on 28th, and a stakeholders meet on 29th in the Wangat Conservation Reserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Suhail, for such wonderful presentation on the kind of initiatives that the department is doing for the conservation of the Hangul, as well as a little recap of the biology that Dr. Khurshid also explained. So we move on to question answers for this session now. So Dr. Khurshid, are you with us? Yes. So, sir, the first we'll take questions for your session first. So, the first question for you is that can we say that the Hanguls are habitat specialists within their distribution range? And given that, are they easily observable in the wild? So, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, to some extent, Hangul are habitat specific, but we can't say that they are to a large extent habitat specific. They can use any kind of habitat that is made available to them, and for that, the first and foremost is that we need to have large protection for the animal, and it can itself go into finding its habitat everywhere it used to have, because as we already talked about, that we had a huge network of range available for the Hangul earlier. It used to range from Kishtewar up to Gurez Conservation Reserve, and there were lot many different habitats available for the species, and uh, it would always try to use all those species which were ideal for the animal to grow and breed.
Right, sir. And so the next question for you is that what is the breeding system like in the Hangul? Are they monogamous or is there any other system in place? Are we
They
aware
have
of this?
a leg system of breeding, wherein you have the males and females breeding together. So you have the females in large herds uh, with the number of males. Uh, so it's a kind of polygamy itself, but the problem that we have been facing in this species is that we have been witnessing a low breeding in the population, and that is a concern, and that is all because of the less number of females in the population that we have at present, which needed to be resolved.
Right. Mr. Sir, do you want to say something?
Yes, Dr. Samina has a question for Dr. Khurshid.
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Hi, Arundhati. First of all, I congratulate the Chief Wildlife Warden of JNK, uh, Shri Indisar Sohail and Dr. Kushi. They're doing a wonderful job. Definitely a team effort. I would like to, get from Dr. Kushi, because he has been doing it since 2 decades. He has been in Hangul conservation and research. He has already collared a few individuals. He has done some genetic collaborative work as well. So, where the department is at the brink of starting the conservation breeding center, and we will have different institution level collaborations. Like he's already at Smithsonian Institution for this. So, what will be the general takeaway so that you from Dr. Khurshid as an expert from of Hangul this as Hangul expert. So, how will we proceed with what is the general takeaway from his research so that it becomes a successful, breeding conservation effort?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Dr. Samina, it's wonderful that you have flagged in a very important uh, question. Uh, that is what brings us here in Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institution. We have been seeing that for successful Hangul conservation breeding, we need to have to understand, first of all, uh, bringing the animal to captivity is one part of it, but making the animal breed successfully for reintroduction is a large concern. And it's not very easy for the animal like Hangul to let them breed the way they are bred in the captivity, and our objective has to be the reintroduction of the bred stock into the wild. So that is actually the cause which brought us to the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institution, and we have tried to learn a lot of practices and procedures that they have been following here in Smithsonian Conservation Reserve. And for that we have also been to the wilds. Wilds is we have the largest conservation breeding facility in the North America. We went there in Ohio Conservation Reserve, and we have what we have seen there. uh, they have the breeding facility for the Bukhara red deer, which is the close relative of Hangul. And we could understand that we need to uh, uh, actually adopt all those practices and procedures that they have been following for the successful breeding of Bukhara deer, for the successful breeding of Peri David's deer. And that's a great challenge for us all together to ensure the successful conservation breeding program for the Hangul. And for that we need to initiate with the this capturing the founder stock, provided we have some more logistics to be done at the conservation breeding program to make it more successful. That we will be sharing when once we are back, and we are getting some of the experts from conservation biology institution to see the facility and to see the animal in the wild also. They will be coming in September. They will also provide some inputs into it, and we are proposing to have their meeting with the CZA, also with the Ministry of Environment and Forest Secretary and ADG and others, so that we try to kind of have their expertise involved in the successful conservation breeding program, and try to uh, initiate the program at the earliest that we need to have.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Kashif. So we move on to the next question for you. So, sir, the next question for you is that you mentioned that the cause of decline of the species from its past distribution range. So, would you recommend conservation translocation of the species in these regions that it has been separated from for further conservation?
No, that is what I have already discussed. The conservation breeding program is actually the aim, the goal of the program is to restock the uh, the population that we have in the isolated areas like Shikarka Conservation Reserve. So that is why the conservation breeding center was established in Shikarka Conservation Reserve, so that we can augment the population that is already existing, a small population that is already existing in Shikarka Conservation Reserve. We need to augment that population with the conservation bred population into the wild. So translocating is one part of it. That would be the translocating the founder stock into the breeding center, and then we are first of all initiating or starting with the soft release of the bred population into the conservation Shikarka Conservation Reserve itself to augment its population, and then later on the second step would be translocating them to other erstwhile stronghold areas.
Right, sir. And so the next question for you is that how divergent is the Kashmir stag, is the Hangul from the Central Asian red deer? And especially if we use them, if in case we use them as a parent stock for, for conservation breeding programs.
How different it is from the Central Asian clad is that what we are going to now understand. And for that, we have initiated the whole genome sequencing of the species, and that is already the first phase of that has already been covered. And we are also going to to the nuclear genomics with the species, comparing them with the other two subspecies of the Central Asian deer, the Bukhara and the Yakan deer, to see how divergent they are actually. Because as far as the our previous research, the genetic research has is considered, we have been able to resolve the phylogeny of the species to some extent, and we have been able to uh, come out with the observation that the Hangul has been diverged from Bukhara deer than from the European red deer. And it has diverged long back 1.5 million years ago, which is a very long time, and which is a very long gap uh, during which time the animal can evolve of its own as a separate species. That is what we are going to actually study further in the Hangul genomics.
Right, so those were the questions for you. We move on to questions for Mr. Suhail. So, sir, the first question for you is that you have, you have mentioned in your presentation that you would be establishing an ex-situ conservation program for the species in focus. So, what would be the source of a potential founder stock for this program, if you have identified anything as such?
As I mentioned in my presentation, the first and foremost, we are trying to get the some individuals from the local population, so the free-ranging population in Shikarga area itself, where the conservation breeding facility is in place. So we have confirmed the presence of at least 14 Hangul through our camera traps in the region, and we have been habituating the small population towards the conservation breeding facility, in which we were successful to some extent, and hopefully by this year autumn season we will be able to get some animals inside. And the second option is to get some individuals from the wild population from Dachigam, where we are collaborating with the Wildlife Institute of India and SCOST, which sends a team of veterinarians from WII, and we'll go for capturing them from the wild in Dachigam National Park. That is the second option.
Right, so thank you for reiterating the information on the question. Second question for you is that I think it can be, Dr. Khushi, you can also add in once Mr. Sohail ends. It is that how effective has community participation been for the conservation of the species in terms of management of the conflict, or in terms of livestock competition of livestock?
Yes. Community programs have been going on in and around Dachigam National Park and other protected areas where Hangul is found, and particularly with the tribal communities. Our department has been involving them in participatory management at every level, at panchayat level also. So they have been at the forefront in collaborating with the department, particularly the grazing community. We have done the profiling of the grazing community in Tral Conservation Reserve. And the second aspect, the poaching, to control the poaching, we have done the gun profiling of the erstwhile hunters in and around the Tral Wildlife Sanctuary. We have enlisted the licensed gun holders, and there's a regular monitoring in that aspect also.
Yeah,
All
people's
right.
participation is very important, and we need to enhance it as much as possible we can, because if we see the population of Hangul, the major one of the major causes of concern for the declining population has been the excessive livestock grazing, and plus the fawn predation by dogs the herders are carrying. So we need to try to gain a lot of community support in terms of number of programs that we can try to have with them, or we can try to uh, involve them in some of the uh, management practices, so that they feel themselves part of the conservation initiatives. That will help in long-term conservation of the species.
Right, sir. Thank you so much. So I think those were the questions we had for both the speakers. So with that, we come to an end to our 63rd Know Your Species, Know Your Zoo talk. In this case, Know the Department talk. And so on behalf of CZA, I would firstly like to thank Dr. Khurshid Ahmed, to Mr. Sohail and to Mr. Gupta for taking time out of their busy schedules and joining us for this talk, and also informing the audience more on the species in focus, as well as the initiatives that the Department of Wildlife Protection (J&K) is undertaking for conservation. And would also like to thank the audience who have been patient with us throughout and have learned more on the species in focus, which is endemic to our country as well as the department. And with this, we conclude the talk. And I would also, lastly, I would also like to tell the audience that we'll be back again next week with our week 64 talk, which is on the Magar or the marsh crocodile and the Nawab Wajid Ali Shah Zoological Garden, Uttar Pradesh, which is popularly known as the Lucknow Zoo. So do tune in for our week 64 talk next week. And on behalf of everyone at CZA, namaskar. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Thank you.
much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.